I never imagined a stranger's warning would save my life. That morning, the city felt colder than usual. The kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes you question every decision you've ever made. I sat alone in a corner booth of a small cafe, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee I barely tasted. The world outside rushed by, but inside I was frozen numb from the sting of my sister's betrayal just days before. I kept replaying her words, the lies, the way she'd looked at me as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. I'd come here to escape, to find a moment of peace. But all I found was emptiness. That's when I noticed him, a boy, maybe 12 or 13, standing just outside the window. His clothes were threadbare, his hair matted beneath a faded beanie, and his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a wariness I recognized all too well. I tried to look away, but he caught my gaze and, after a moment's hesitation, pushed open the door and shuffled inside. The barista shot him a warning look, but he ignored it. Heading straight for my table, he stopped in front of me, his voice barely above a whisper, but urgent, desperate. "Don't drink that coffee," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. For a second, I just stared at him, unsure if I'd heard right. Why would a homeless boy care what I drank? But there was something in his tone of raw, pleading honesty that made my heart race. I set the cup down, my mind spinning. I had no idea that listening to him would change everything. Growing up, my family was the kind that made other people envious. We were loud, loving, and fiercely loyal at least. That's how it seemed from the outside. Sunday dinners were sacred, filled with laughter, teasing, and the kind of inside jokes that only families share. My sister Emily and I were inseparable. She was 2 years younger, but we were more like twins, finishing each other's sentences and sharing secrets late into the night. Our parents always said we were their greatest joy, and for a long time, I believed nothing could ever come between us, but life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. It started small little arguments over borrowed clothes, missed phone calls, or forgotten birthdays. I brushed them off, convinced that nothing could shake the foundation we'd built. Then, last year, our father passed away suddenly. The grief was a tidal wave, pulling us under and scattering us in different directions. My mother retreated into herself, barely speaking. Emily and I tried to hold things together, but the cracks were already forming. The real fracture came when the will was read. I'd always assumed we'd split everything equally, just as our father would have wanted. But Emily had other plans. She'd convinced our mother, in her vulnerable state, to sign over the house and most of the savings to her. I found out by accident, stumbling across the paperwork one afternoon when I stopped by to check on Mom. The shock was like a physical blow. When I confronted Emily, she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen before and said, "You always had everything handed to you. It's my turn now." Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. I tried to reason with her, to remind her of all the years we'd spent side by side, but she shut me out completely. My mother, lost in her own grief, refused to get involved. Suddenly, the family I'd always relied on was gone, replaced by silence and suspicion. I moved out of the house I'd grown up in, taking only what I could carry. The rest, my childhood memories. My sense of belonging felt like they'd been stolen along with the inheritance. Since then, I'd been drifting untethered. Friends tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about what had happened. I felt ashamed, as if I'd failed at the one thing that mattered most, keeping my family together. The loneliness was suffocating. I started spending more time in cafes and parks, anywhere I could be surrounded by strangers and not have to pretend I was okay. That's how I ended up in that cafe, clutching a cup of coffee and trying to convince myself that I could start over, even if I had to do it alone. Looking back, I can see how much I'd changed. The girl who once believed in unconditional love and unbreakable bonds was gone, replaced by someone wary and guarded. I missed the old me, the one who trusted easily and loved without fear. But after what Emily had done, I didn't know if I could ever be that person again. And yet, as I sat in that cafe, lost in memories and regret, I had no idea that a stranger's warning was about to shake me out of my isolation and force me to see the world and myself in a completely new light. At first, I almost laughed. The idea that a homeless boy would warn me about my coffee seemed absurd, like something out of a bad movie. I glanced down at the cup, the steam curling up in lazy spirals, and then back at him. His eyes darted around the cafe, never settling for long. He looked scared, but also determined, as if he'd made up his mind to do something brave and now couldn't back down. "Why shouldn't I drink it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to sound afraid, but the truth was, my heart was pounding. I'd always prided myself on being rational, not the type to fall for wild stories or urban legends. But after everything with Emily, I'd learned the hard way that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you. And sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who show up when it matters. The boy hesitated, glancing over his shoulder again. "Just don't, please. I saw something." His voice was barely audible, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his cheeks hollow and his hands trembling slightly. I wondered how long it had been since he'd had a real meal or a safe place to sleep. Part of me wanted to brush him off, to tell him to leave me alone and let me wallow in peace. But another part, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be blindsided by someone you trusted, couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes. I looked around the cafe, searching for anything out of the ordinary. The barista was busy wiping down the counter, her movements quick and practiced. A couple sat by the window, deep in conversation, their heads bent close together. An older man in a suit scrolled through his phone, oblivious to the world around him. Everything seemed normal. But now that the boy had planted the seed of doubt, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Did someone do something to my coffee?" I pressed, lowering my voice. The boy nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw a man put something in it when you went to the bathroom," he whispered. My mind raced, trying to remember if I'd left my cup unattended. I had, just for a moment, when I'd gone to wash my hands. I'd been so lost in thought that I hadn't even considered the possibility of danger. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to believe he was just a scared kid looking for attention, or maybe even a free meal. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes flickered with genuine concern, that made it impossible to dismiss him outright. Still, I couldn't help but feel a surge of skepticism. After all, hadn't I just learned that trusting the wrong person could cost you everything? I studied him, searching for any sign of deception. He looked back at me, unflinching, his vulnerability laid bare. I realized then how different we were, me, guarded and suspicious, and him risking rejection to warn a stranger. I wondered what it must have taken for him to approach me, to speak up when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. The tension between us was palpable. I could feel the eyes of the barista on us, her expression wary. I wondered if she thought he was bothering me, or if she saw something I didn't. The couple by the window laughed at something, oblivious to the undercurrent of fear running through my veins. I glanced at the door, half expecting someone to burst in and confirm my worst suspicions. I looked back at the boy, torn between disbelief and a growing sense of unease. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice softer now. He hesitated, then said Eli. The name hung in the air between us, fragile and uncertain. I realized I was at a crossroads: trust my instincts or trust a stranger. The memory of Emily's betrayal flashed through my mind. It's a painful reminder of what happens when you let your guard down. But as I stared at Eli, couldn't help but wonder if this was different. If maybe, just this once, listening to someone I barely knew could save me from repeating the same mistakes. I wrapped my hands tighter around the cup, feeling the heat seep into my skin, and tried to decide if I was brave enough to believe him. I sat there, staring at the cup, my mind a battlefield of doubt and fear. Eli's warning echoed in my ears, louder than the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation around us. I could feel the weight of his gaze, pleading with me to trust him. Every instinct screamed at me to dismiss him, to cling to the last shreds of logic and normalcy I had left. But something inside me, maybe the part that had been so thoroughly shattered by Emily's betrayal, refused to ignore the possibility that he was telling the truth. With a shaky breath, I pushed the coffee away, the ceramic scraping against the table. Eli's shoulders sagged in relief, but I could see he was still tense, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. I tried to steady my nerves, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd let my recent pain make me paranoid. but I couldn't bring myself to lift the cup again. Just then, a commotion erupted near the counter. The older man in the suit, who had been quietly scrolling through his phone, suddenly lurched forward, knocking his cup to the floor. The crash was deafening in the small space. He clutched at his throat, his face contorting in pain and confusion. For a split second, the entire cafe froze, every head turned, every conversation silenced. Then chaos broke loose. The barista screamed, dropping the rag she'd been holding. The couple by the window jumped to their feet, one of them fumbling for a phone. Someone shouted for help, and another customer rushed to the man's side, trying to steady him as he gasped for air. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, horror-struck, unable to move. The scene felt surreal, like I was watching it unfold from underwater. Eli grabbed my arm, grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "See?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I told you." His eyes were wide with fear, but also something else, vindication. Maybe, or the heavy burden of being right when no one wanted to listen. I looked at him, my own fear mirrored in his face, and realized just how close I'd come to being the one on the floor. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their uniforms a blur of blue and white as they rushed to the man's side. The cafe was in chaos, people crying, shouting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I sat frozen, Eli still clutching my arm, my mind racing with questions. Had someone really poisoned the coffee? Was it meant for me, or was it just a terrible coincidence? I glanced at my untouched cup, bile rising in my throat. The police arrived soon after, cordoning off the area and questioning everyone. I watched as they examined the man's cup, their faces grim. The barista was sobbing, insisting she hadn't seen anything unusual. The couple by the window recounted the moment the man collapsed, their voices shaky. When it was my turn, I told them about Eli's warning, about how he'd seen someone tampering with my coffee. The officers exchanged glances, skepticism clear in their eyes, but they took my statement all the same. Through it all, Eli stayed by my side, silent and watchful. I could see the toll it was taking on him, the way his hands shook, the way he flinched every time someone raised their voice. I wanted to comfort him, to thank him, but the words caught in my throat. I was still reeling from the shock, from the realization that I'd been seconds away from disaster. As the cafe emptied out, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd trusted a stranger, and it had saved my life. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me, a glimmer of hope. A reminder that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to trust again. Eli looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for understanding. I squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words, and knew that nothing would ever be the same. The cafe was a blur of flashing lights and frantic voices. Paramedics wheeled the man out on a stretcher, his face pale and still, while police officers moved from table to table, collecting statements and searching for answers. I sat numbly at my booth, my untouched coffee now cold and forgotten, replaying the last hour in my mind. The shock of what had happened hadn't worn off. If anything, it was deepening, settling into my bones like a chill I couldn't shake. An officer approached me, his notepad ready. "Ma'am, can you walk me through exactly what happened?" he asked, his tone gentle but businesslike. I tried to steady my voice as I explained how Eli had warned me, how I'd pushed my coffee away, and how the man at the counter had collapsed moments later. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly when I mentioned Eli. "This boy, do you know him?" he asked. I shook my head, feeling a pang of guilt. "No, I've never seen him before. He just showed up." They asked for a description. I did my best to recall every detail. His age, his clothes, the way his eyes darted around the room. As I spoke, I realized I hadn't seen Eli since the paramedics arrived. I scanned the cafe, searching for his small, wiry frame, but he was gone. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air, leaving me with more questions than answers. The officer jotted down my account, thanked me, and moved on to the next witness. The chaos of the cafe was overwhelming, but inside I felt strangely hollow. I kept thinking about Eli, where he'd gone, if he was safe, and why he'd risked so much to warn me. I wondered if he'd been afraid of the police, or if he was just used to slipping away unnoticed. The guilt gnawed at me. I should have done something, said something, made sure he was okay. Instead, I'd let him disappear, just like everyone else in my life seemed to do. As the adrenaline faded, a new wave of emotion crashed over me. Confusion, fear, and a deep, aching loneliness. I pulled out my phone almost without thinking and saw a string of missed calls and messages from my mother. My heart twisted. We hadn't spoken much since the fallout with Emily, but news traveled fast in our family, and I knew she must have heard about the incident already. There were messages from Emily too short-clipped and oddly formal. "Are you okay? Heard about the café? Call me." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. I felt trapped between two worlds. The public chaos of the café, with its sirens and flashing lights, and the private turmoil that had been simmering inside me for months. The people around me were strangers, yet their concern felt more genuine than the hollow words from my own family. I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust them again, or if the damage was too deep to repair. As the police wrapped up their investigation, I was allowed to leave. I stepped out into the cold afternoon, the city buzzing with life as if nothing had happened. I walked aimlessly, my mind racing with questions. Why had Eli chosen me? What had he seen that no one else had? And why did I feel so responsible for him, a boy I barely knew? That night, I lay awake, replaying every detail. I thought about the man in the cafe, about how easily that could have been me. I thought about Eli's haunted eyes, his quiet bravery. And I thought about my family, the people I was supposed to trust most, wondering if I'd ever find my way back to them, or if I was destined to keep drifting, alone and uncertain. The world outside was quiet, but inside, the storm raged on, leaving me with only one certainty. I couldn't let Eli's warning be the end of our story. I had to find him to thank him, and maybe, in the process, find a way to heal myself. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Eli's warning and his disappearance haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of his anxious eyes, the way he'd risked everything to help a stranger. I needed to find him, not just to thank him, but to understand what had driven him to step into my life so suddenly and then vanish just as quickly. I started at the cafe, hoping someone might have seen where he went. The barista, still shaken from the day before, remembered him. "He comes in sometimes," she said, her voice soft. "Usually just stands outside. I think he sleeps near the old church on Maple." I thanked her, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The idea of a child sleeping on the streets made my chest ache. I walked the few blocks to the church, scanning every doorway and alley. The city felt different, now sharper, more alive, every shadow a possible hiding place. I finally spotted him huddled behind a dumpster, knees drawn to his chest, arms wrapped tight around himself. He looked up as I approached, wary but not surprised. "Eli," I said gently, crouching down to his level. "I've been looking for you." He didn't answer at first, just watched me with those guarded eyes. I told him how much his warning had meant, how it had saved my life. For a moment I thought he might run, but then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. I sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. "Why did you help me?" I asked. He shrugged, staring at the ground. "People don't usually see me," he said quietly. "But I see them. I saw that man put something in your cup. I tried to tell the others, but no one listened." His voice was so small, so tired, that it broke my heart as we talked. Eli's story unfolded in fragments. His mother had died 2 years ago, and he'd bounced between foster homes and the streets ever since. He'd learned to watch people, to read danger in their faces and movements. "You looked sad," he said, glancing at me, "like you needed someone to care." His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized how invisible I'd felt lately, how much I'd needed someone to notice my pain. Listening to Eli, I saw the world through his eyes, how survival depended on intuition, on reading the smallest signs. I saw how much he'd lost and how much courage it took for him to reach out. In his vulnerability, I recognized my own. The walls I'd built around my heart suddenly felt flimsy, unnecessary. I reached out, offering him my hand. "You're not invisible to me," I said, "and you don't have to be alone." For the first time, Eli smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but real. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. His pain and resilience awakened a part of me I thought I'd lost. My empathy, my willingness to trust, my belief in the goodness of others. As we sat together in the cold morning light, I knew I couldn't change Eli's past, but I could be part of his future. And maybe, just maybe, he could help me find my way back to myself in the days that followed. Eli and I became unlikely companions. I brought him warm meals and clean clothes, and together we navigated the city's maze of shelters and social workers. At first, he was hesitant to accept my help, his pride and mistrust hard-earned from years of disappointment. But slowly, as I showed up day after day, his guard began to lower. We talked for hours about his mother, about the foster homes, about the little things he missed, like the taste of homemade soup or the sound of someone saying his name with kindness. In return, he listened to my story, never judging, just quietly understanding in a way that no one else had. Helping, Eli gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before my family fell apart. I realized that healing wasn't just about mending my own wounds, but about reaching out to others who were hurting too. Through him, I learned that trust could be rebuilt, one small act of kindness at a time. I found myself laughing again, even daring to hope that things could get better, not just for me, but for both of us. With Eli's encouragement, I finally gathered the courage to face my family. I called my mother first, my voice trembling as I explained everything that had happened. The betrayal, the loneliness, the fear that I'd never belong again. To my surprise, she listened, really listened. She apologized for her silence, for letting her grief blind her to what was happening between Emily and me. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was honest, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Confronting Emily was harder. I met her at the park where we used to play as kids, the air thick with memories and unspoken words. I told her how much her actions had hurt me, how lost I'd felt without her. She tried to defend herself at first, but eventually, her anger gave way to tears. We talked for hours, sometimes arguing, sometimes just sitting in silence. I set boundaries, clear, firm, and necessary. I told her I was willing to forgive, but only if she was willing to change. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Eli's life began to shift too. With my help, he was placed in a safe foster home, one that promised stability and care. I visited him often, bringing books and treats, and we made a pact to always look out for each other, no matter what. Our friendship became a lifeline for us, both a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for connection, for healing, for something new. Looking back, I realized that Eli had saved me in more ways than one. He'd reminded me that trust is a risk worth taking, that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people who change our lives forever are the ones we almost overlook. Our paths had crossed at the exact moment we both needed it most, and together we found the courage to start again. Looking back, I realized how close I came to missing the most important lesson of my life. If I hadn't listened to Eli, if I dismissed him as just another face in the crowd, I might not be here to tell this story. His warning didn't just save me from physical harm. It woke me up to the truth that every person, no matter how invisible they seem, carries a story worth hearing. I used to think trust was something you gave only to those who'd earned it, but now I see that, sometimes, trust is an act of courage, a leap of faith that can change everything. Eli taught me that compassion isn't about grand gestures. It's about noticing the people right in front of us, especially those we're tempted to overlook. In a world that moves so fast, it's easy to become numb, to retreat into our own pain and miss the quiet cries for help all around us. But when we choose to really listen, we open ourselves to connection, to healing, and to the possibility of being changed in ways we never expected. I still have scars from what happened with my family, and I know rebuilding trust will take time. But I'm no longer afraid to reach out, to risk being hurt, or to let someone in. Eli's friendship reminded me that even in our darkest moments, we're never truly alone. There's always someone who sees us, someone who cares, even if it's not who we expected. So if you're watching this, I hope you'll take a moment to look around your own life. Who might you be overlooking? Whose story haven't you heard? Sometimes the person who needs you most is the one you least expect. And sometimes, just listening can be the most powerful act of all. Don't miss your chance to make a difference. You never know whose life you might save yours.